How much life can you imagine? Not like how long of a life can you imagine, but how much, right? Life has a couple of qualities about it. Certainly there's a length to life, but there's also a depth to life. There have probably been, for all of us, seasons of life where life has seemed more full, and other times where life has seemed like a huge struggle, right? So how much life, at this point in your life, how much life can you imagine? I bet at different times along the course of your life, across all of our lives, there have been people who kind of step into our lives and give us a bigger picture of life than maybe we had imagined before. It starts when we're young, we're imaginative dreamers, and we look around at our family members, maybe our mom or dad, older siblings, and we look at them like, oh, that's what life is supposed to look like. And we watch them and we're pretty sure they're Superman or Superwoman, and they're kind of our vision for life for a while. We get older and have some friends, meet some great people. We start to look across our culture and see some pretty phenomenal leaders and people who help kind of expand and help give us a bigger vision of what life could look like. In fact, if we were just to look at culture right now and think about some of the people who are kind of shaping things, there are some really great thinkers out there who think forward and help us see a different way forward in life. People like John Maxwell, Brene Brown, Malcolm Gladwell, Simon Sinek. I bet you could list some of your own. They kind of help us see bigger than we would see on our own and say maybe there is more life. There are people who have orchestrated movements where people who were kind of cast aside or oppressed or treated poorly and were kind of robbed of a vision of life, and some people came along and imagined a totally different world. People like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Princess Diana, Mother Teresa, and we could go on and on with a list of people who have imagined more life for people than maybe they would have imagined for themselves. Or maybe motivators. Maybe motivators are the people who have kind of inspired you along the way. People like Tony Robbins or Oprah Winfrey or Bear Grylls, or I'm sure everyone's been affected by Richard Simmons, right? All the great motivators. There are people who expand our vision of what life looks like. I encountered a guy like this. I've encountered several along my lifetime, but one guy that may be common to some of us is this guy named Bob. In fact, the first time I heard of Bob, he was actually just a subject of a story in a book by a guy named Donald Miller. And I was reading about this guy's friend named Bob, and I'm like, man, this guy sounds awesome. And so a few years later, when I gather up with some youth pastors and this speaker walks in named Bob, it's that guy. And he starts telling stories, and I realize it's that guy. And so to give you just a little introduction to this guy, he's a guy who I just think, man, he just inspires a different kind of life than a lot of people do. This friend, Donald Miller, introduces Bob at the beginning of Bob's book, and he says this: Bob loves people with the force that is natural. And by natural, I mean like nature, like a waterfall or wind or waves on the ocean. What do you do with a man who will get on a plane and fly around the world to attend the wedding of a new acquaintance? What do you do with the man who offices at Tom Sawyer Island at Disneyland because angry lawyers are less likely to yell at him there? And for that matter, what do you do with a lawyer whose business card simply reads, helper? What do you do with a man who worked for 2 years to free a child from a prison in Uganda, all because I met the kid and asked him to? How do you explain the fact that he lumbers pajama-clad into his garden every morning to find a rose for his sleeping wife? I don't know how to explain Bob's love except to say it is utterly and delightfully devastating. You simply cannot live the same once you know him. If you've heard Bob Goff speak, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Bob has offered to get on a plane for my day of trouble, called exactly when I needed to, spoke a word of truth when I was being bombarded with lies, given me a family, given me a home, and given me a vision for what can happen in a person's life when they are devoted to giving it away. He says this about Bob. He says, I think Bob Goff knows God, and I think God's love flows through him. This guy named Bob lives a compelling life, a life that causes people to imagine life differently than maybe they had before. And Bob would be the first one to tell you that it has everything to do with his vision of life, whose name is Jesus. In fact, here at Canyon Ridge, we have one who expands our vision of life in ways that no one else can. And someone who we want to fix our eyes on, the book of Hebrews says. The one that we want to focus on all the time. Our life's visionary here is Jesus. And so as we think about how much life we could live, we catch an image, a vision of what that could look like the more we look at Jesus. And so let's just take a few minutes and think about that. In fact, think for a second, who has lived with greater joy, depth, and impact than Jesus? Could you name a person who's lived with greater joy, depth, or impact than Jesus? If you were to look at his life and see what he did, he lived with great joy. He lived deeply with people. He lived with great impact. In fact, this guy named John Ortberg wrote a book called Who Is This Man?, talking about how Jesus essentially affected every sector of our society in multiple cultures all across the planet. In fact, we're sitting here 2,000 years later, many of us bearing his name as Christian, right? Some people have Jesus on their bumper sticker, right? What would you have to do today to get your name on a bumper sticker 2,000 years from now, right? Substantial life. Who's lived a better life than him? And as we look at Jesus, there's lots of ways we could characterize why that is. Jesus brought people closer than anyone ever expected. Everywhere he went, he was gathering up people. Taking people who were on the fringe, who were ignored, neglected, and gathering them up and saying, you have a place with me. He was always bringing people closer, taking all of his connections, inviting them closer. Not only that, but he lived well with others, way more than expected. Jesus could have been a lone wolf. There was no one like him. He could have done his own thing, but over and over and over, he invited people to live deeply with him. At his highest and best moments, at his most devastating and desperate moments, he was surrounded by a community of people. Over and over, he lived really well with a few close friends. On top of that, Jesus helped way more than expected. We know that as we look 2,000 years back, there's a way in which we believe that Jesus helped every single one of us in particular. But even if you just look at his life on earth, he helped people constantly. Healing people who were diseased, inviting people back into culture where they were on the outcast. He was doing all kinds of things to help people. And then certainly he has helped all of us that would cause us to sit here 2,000 years later. He helped way more than expected. On top of that, he gave way more than expected. Over and over, you see him giving his attention, his time, providing resources, taking care of people who had less than what they need. Jesus lived this kind of way. In fact, if you look at the last two lines of that he helped and that he gave, those are two words that describe all the people I talked about at the beginning. Whether it's Bob or Dr. King, or whether it's Mother Teresa, whether it's those motivators or those thinkers, they're people who lived in such a way that they gave part of themselves away to others. And it led to huge impact. What we're about here is looking at Jesus and joining in what he does. And what we find when we look at Jesus is that he casts a vision for our life that is far greater and far beyond anything that we could dream for ourselves. And what we're finding is the more we look at him and the more we live like him, the more we fill up with life. In fact, for the next 4 weeks and in the months beyond that, here's what we're really leaning into with For Life. We just want to follow Jesus to more life than ever before. As you imagine how much life you could possibly have, my guess is you have a sense that there could be more. I don't think there's anyone in here who have said, could you have more life? Could your life be better? You're like, nah, I'm good. Solid right where I'm at, killing it at life right now. There's always more, and the beauty is Jesus points the way for that. And so what we're going to talk about is how do we look at Jesus, do what he did, and just follow right in behind him toward the life that he has always dreamed for us. Jesus said, I am the way, I'm the truth, and the life. And what he was saying is, watch me. I'll show you how. And so for the next 4 weeks, that's what we're going to do. To get started this week, what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into 2 parts. If we're going to live into more life than ever before, if our life is going to fill up, if we're going to head in that direction of our imagination and Jesus' vision for our life, 2 parts to that. The first one is his part. What's Jesus' part in all of that? Jesus' part in all of that is that he invites us to life. He's always inviting us to more. In fact, I want to show you this in John chapter 10, what Jesus' intention for us is. Now, when I start to read John chapter 10, you're like, Drew, I don't really know anything about sheep. And that's fine. It's going to be okay, all right? In John chapter 10, Jesus lays out this parable. And I think you'll find yourself in this story. Even though it's not a story of true events, Jesus is making a point by using an illustration that would have made sense to the people he was speaking to. And for the parts that don't make sense to us non-shepherds here in the desert, I will help us here in a few minutes, all right? John chapter 10, Jesus says this. He says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They'll run from him because they don't know his voice. Verse 6, those who heard Jesus use this illustration didn't understand what he meant, so he explained it. He said, I tell you the truth, I'm the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely, and they will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Jesus uses a couple of images for himself here. He talks about him being the shepherd and being the gate. Now, let me just explain real quick. For a shepherd, their livelihood was the sheep. And what they cared about more than anything was the sheep. And in this culture, every single sheep had a name. It wasn't just this faceless herd of people that if it got bigger, they were more important. No, he knew them by name. It was an all-the-time relationship. They would stay the night. They would walk around. They would spend 24/7 with these sheep. And in this culture, the way that they kept them safe at night was that they would bring them into a sheepfold that were scattered all over the place. They didn't have cinder block walls in their own little quarter-acre patch or whatever. They had wide open terrain and periodic sheepfolds. And what those looked like were just a circle of rocks, yay high, or bricks, yay high, and they would bring their sheep in. There was only one way in and one way out. When they didn't have one of those, sometimes they would use a cave with a narrow opening. And so what they would do is at the end of a day, they would take all of their sheep and take them to the sheepfold. And as each one walked in, they would look carefully over the sheep. And if they were injured in any way, they would put oil on that. Or if they were dehydrated in any way, they would make sure that they would have enough water. And one by one, they would bring the sheep in. And then you're all like, wait, Jesus says he's the shepherd. Jesus says he's the gate. That's weird. Which one is it? The answer is both. Because how many openings were there in the sheepfold? There was one. Guess who kept people from coming in that gate at night? The shepherd. You know why? The shepherd was the gate. He would lay down at the gate and make sure that nothing got in and no one wandered out, that everyone was safe and secure. It was the only legitimate way in. In fact, sometimes multiple shepherds would share these at night. And so the next morning, as they would take their sheep out so they could thrive and explore and do all these different things, the shepherd would stand at the gate and say, all right, all of mine, come with me. And they knew the shepherd's voice. Some of you who are parents, you get this, right? Your kids know your voice, right? Like there's that thing where you're in the store and you shout their name and they're like, boom, they're on it, right? They know how to do that. In fact, I was up on the mountain last week. Our kids were doing some skiing and snowboarding, which is awesome. They would look over and make sure we had them once in a while, and then they would slide on down, come back up, and it was all good. And one of my little ones was walking around, and he thought he had walked up to me. And he walked up to another guy who had jeans and the same jacket on, and he's just like chatting away and grabbing onto his leg and all these other things. And then he looks up, he's like, what? And then he's like running away. You know what I'm saying? He was like, He didn't even realize it. I'm like, hey, Zeke, look up. And he's like, ooh. And so he jets over to me. Because he knew me. I'm his shepherd, right? He knows where he belongs. And as long as I'm around, he's good. He's safe. And this is what Jesus is saying. That Jesus, when he invites us to life, he takes us from death to life. He takes us from death to life. That when we were out and solo on our own, doing our own thing, making all kinds of mistakes, we brought death to everything. Now, we know what physical death is like, but we also know what emotional, relational, all that kind of stuff that we've broken and messed up. I don't know about you, but I've messed up a ton of stuff. I've killed lots of stuff because of my poor behavior and my poor choices. Jesus says, come be a part with me. Come be a part of my flock. Jump in with me, and I will lead you. I'll protect you. I'll take care of you. Right? He brings us from death to life. How many of you guys have ever watched National Geographic and you see one animal wander off by themselves? You know what's about to happen, right? Lone wolf, that sounds awesome. Lone sheep, not a good situation, right? You got to flip the channel before your kid is scarred for life, right? Jesus says, I'll bring you from death to life. On your own, you don't have a chance, but come in with me. Join my family. I'll take care of you. I'll be the one who provides for you. I'll be the one who takes care of your wounds. I'll be the one who leads you to the very best pastures. In fact, this is what he invites us to. In verse 9, we catch a sense of this. He invites us to safety and freedom. He says, those who know my voice will be saved. Now, for some of you who have been around church for a while, when you hear saved, you think like, sweet, not gonna, like that's fire insurance. I'll be with God forever in heaven. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it because a relationship with Jesus lasts forever. We never have to wonder whether we'll be separate from him in this life or the next. But more than that, he brings us into safety, that we can thrive. And just like those sheep could be fine as long as they knew the shepherd was around because he would protect them and provide for them, same thing for us. When we come in behind Jesus, we don't have to worry about much. We can be like my kids all over the side of a mountain. They're not freaked out because if anything happens, Dad's right there. It's going to be fine. So they can enjoy things. They don't have to freak out or worry about stuff. And that's the beauty of following Jesus. He invites us into life in all of those ways. He not only gives us safety and freedom, he gives us a leadership and vision. In verse 3, it says that the shepherd walks out and he leads them out. One last fact about sheep you didn't want to know is in the Middle East, they did not drive sheep. Those of you who have collies and sheep herding dogs, that's not how they did it there. They did not drive sheep or try to push them a direction, and that's what a lot of people think Jesus is about, and that's not it at all. Instead, he uses Middle Eastern image of shepherding, where the shepherd would walk ahead and the sheep trusted and knew that he had good in mind for them, and they would follow in behind. He would always go first. Jesus provides leadership. The image that he's painting for us is, follow me. I'll take you to the best pastures. I'll take you to the best kind of life. I'll protect you from all the junk that you don't need as a part of your life. All the ways that you try to provide for yourself is not going to work out for you. Follow me, I'll take you there. And he gives us a vision for life. We catch it in verse 10 where he says he wants us to have a full and satisfying life, a rich, deep, and abundant life, other translations says. Life to the full, another translation says. This is what Jesus wants for all of us. And so his part, Jesus' part, is to invite us to life. But not just from death to life. He also invites us from life to more life. Now this is where all of us jump in. If you've been thinking, oh man, you're just talking about deciding to follow Jesus, which some of you in here, you don't really follow Jesus yet. And let me tell you, that's the first step. Just fall in behind him, see where he takes you. Trust him with your whole life. But some of you are like, I've been doing that for 20 years. When are you going to start talking to me? Well, I have been talking to you. I'll tell you why in a second. Here's the truth, is that even when Jesus calls us to life a little bit, there's always more. No matter how long you've been following him, Jesus has another step for you to take, a new place to take you, ways to call you to life more and more and more. In fact, in our clear moments, none of us would look anybody else in the eye and say, I have arrived. I got this. Everything's right? Jesus invites us not only to come alive and leave our old broken ways behind, but also to step into more and more life. It wells up for all of eternity. This is the awesome thing. In fact, James says it this way, that whatever is good and perfect comes down to us from God our Father. That God puts, and when we start following Jesus, we realize that all the good that's in our life comes from him. And the beauty of this is that when you know where good comes from, you can write a thank you note. You can be grateful for all the good that's in your life instead of entitled like life owes us a living and frustrated and dissatisfied. Instead, we can say, oh man, I know where this comes from, and we can be grateful for all the good. So let's just take a second. Does anybody have any good in your life? Now, I know there's tough stuff. Anybody got any good? Give me a little head nod, a little something, something, a little woo-woo, just anyway, feel free to be awake. It's okay. Totally fine. In fact, think about this. What good has God brought into your life? If Jesus is not only going to take us from death to life, but from life to more life, Jesus has something in mind for the good in our life. Let's think about some of the good in our life. Anybody have good connections? Meaning there's people that you're acquainted to that you see regularly, and it's just kind of cool to see them. I got some guys that I go to the gym with on a regular basis, and then there's this whole community of people who are always there that are crazy enough to go that early in the morning, and we get to chat with them and catch up with their lives. They don't know a ton about our life. We love to connect with them. Or at practices with my kids, the other parents of the other kids, their connections, they'll just enjoy. It's a good thing in life. Jesus says, hey, that's life, and that's great. I brought good into your life. Enjoy that. Be grateful for that. But then he says, I'll give you more life if you want. He says, if you'll take those connections and bring a friend, bring them closer to me, invite them closer to me, you'll find even more life. You can settle for life and have good connections, or you can have more life by bringing your connections and helping them know Jesus. This is what Jesus did over and over, constantly connecting people to him. Anybody got good friends? You got good friends? It's good to have people that go from being connections to really good friends. You know what I mean? In fact, in the fall, we're doing this whole Bring Life thing. We're putting groups of people together, and someone challenged us to say, hey, just grab some people in your life who aren't yet in a group and put them together, invite them to a group. And right now we're like a small group of 20 people. And it's hilarious. We have a blast. We watch hockey games together. We're going to watch a football game together tonight. The girls went out and had fun on Wednesday night. We gather Tuesdays. We're talking about marriage, which is a riot in between all these people, all the different things that we screw up in marriage. It's just hilarious. It's good to live with people. We've got good friends. You got good friends? Be grateful. Enjoy that. But did you know there's more life available in that? That the more we lean in and really choose community and live deeply together, to be vulnerable and transparent with one another, to challenge one another and encourage one another. The farther we go in that, the more life there is in it. Not because it's easy, but because it's really, really good. Jesus says you can have life, but don't just settle for life. You can have more life. Friends are good. There's more life in choosing real community. Anybody got strength? Anybody in here strong? If the person's strong next to you, tell them you're strong. If my wife was here, I'd be like, you're super strong. Right? So here's the thing. Everyone has strengths. We all have abilities. We have talents. We have education. We have history. We have experience. We have all kinds of things that we get to enjoy. Anybody really enjoy their hobby or their habit of things that you're just kind of strong and good at? God's put those in us, and we get to enjoy those things. some of us even have the joy of our vocation is built around that, and we get to love doing that thing. And that's good that God has brought into our life. That's life. But Jesus says there's more life. If we follow Jesus, he says there's even more life than you just enjoying and being satisfied in the strength that you have. When you take that strength and make a difference, Jesus says, I'll give you more life. Every time you take that strength that you have and make a difference, you get more life. Jesus takes the life we have and we multiply it as we share it with others. What about resources? Anybody got resources? Now, I don't know where you would qualify yourself in terms of owning stuff or having money. You know, none of us ever feel like we're rich until we see the reality that like over half the world lives on $2 a day or less, right? Instead, we drive down to like Irvine and feel like we're not rich, right? Somewhere on that scale is us. And the truth is, God has brought good resources into our lives. Whether it's the stuff around our house that we enjoy, hobbies that we get to do. I took my son up on I just recently got a different car, and it has 4-wheel drive, and that's amazing because there's mountains, and I love it. And so I took my son, we picked up a very healthy McDonald's breakfast. And we put it in the car, threw a couple of folding chairs in the back, and we drove up on the side of a mountain and had a phenomenal conversation. Wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have money for gas and a vehicle that was reliable. It's good. It's good that God has brought into our life. But the more we take our good, we can have even more life than that if we give generously. If we take the good things in our life and share those with others. If we share our resources, it wells up into even more life than we had before. Jesus says you can have good and you can have life, but there's more life. And I think there's something in every single one of us that realizes that's what we've been wanting. You see, the world will tell you that more resources is the way to have more life, but that's not true. Resources are a good thing that God has brought into our life, but the answer for more life is not more resources. The answer for more life, according to Jesus, is to give them away, to share with others, to enjoy those deeply with people who you can live life with. So, anybody got good in your life? A little nod, a little something? It's life. It's good. It's good. Jesus says, you want more life? Take all of that good and share it with anybody that you can. He says there's life in connections, but there's more life in bringing a friend. He says there's a lot of good life in your strength, but there's more life in making a difference. There's a lot of life for you in resources, but there's more life in giving generously. Yeah, having friends is a good part of life, but really choosing to live deeply in community with them, there's even more life. Jesus says you can have as much life as you want. In fact, the more we live like Jesus, the more life we'll find in him. The more we live like Jesus, the more we follow him like he said, like that shepherd leading his sheep out, and them lockstep in behind them, the more we actually live and act like Jesus, the more life we will find in him. And so that's his part. He makes a way for us to have life with him, and then he shows us the best kind of life. He brings good things in, and he says you can have even more life the more you share them. The invitation is clear. The question is, are we going to do our part? You see, sheep can be stubborn, right? Sheep don't have to do what they're told. Even if the shepherd has great things in mind, they kind of get to do what they want. And so the question is, for you and for me, is are we going to do our part? How much life do you want? See, our part is this, to share the good of life. For all the good that God has brought into our lives, for us to take that and share that in every way that we can, as much as we can, more and more and more. And the more we do that, the more life we are going to experience. It's the way Jesus showed us. The question is, are we actually going to do that? It's easy for us to sit on a weekend in a room like this and say, oh, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds just like Jesus. And then go out and just soak up the good and try to get it for ourselves. When instead, Jesus is saying, no, 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 no. Life actually multiplies when we share the good with others. In fact, Jesus said it this way. I'm convinced it's one of the craziest things he ever said. He said, you're far happier giving than getting. You're far happier giving than getting. That's crazy talk to our culture. That's crazy talk to our habits. But the truth is you're far happier giving than getting according to Jesus. Now, we can all sit here and have an opinion about that if you want. We could debate whether that's true. We could look back at our experience, but there's really only one way to find out if it's true. You know what it is? Try it. In fact, as we launched into this thing that we're going to invite all of us in by the end of the month called For Life, I just set a goal about 3 or 4 months ago. Every paycheck, I would put $25 aside, and it would be in cash in my wallet, and the only thing I could spend that on was giving things to others they're not expecting. Never done anything like it before, but I just decided to do it. Can I just tell you that out of every paycheck for the last 3 or 4 months, there are exactly $25 that I could put a name, face, and emotion with to every single dollar. You know why? Because you're far happier giving than getting. I agreed with that 4 months ago. Today, I know it. And I'm asking Jesus, what's the next step? How much more life is there available? Because I could tell story on top of story of how awesome and how those people's faces lit up. How the Starbucks I go to every week, when I walked in with a dozen of my favorite donuts from D's Donuts, they're like, what? Are you crazy? It was awesome. I can tell you about the time I showed up at a house of someone who just moved into town, and had I not put the $25 in my wallet ahead of time, I never would have thought about this. I would have just been on with my day, but Jesus says, nope, there's more life than what you've been living, and it's found in taking the good of your life and sharing it with others. It's not in gathering more good for yourself. Jesus says, I'm a good shepherd. I'll bring all the good you need. Just take what you have and share it with others. And watch as your life fills up more and more, and watch as lives around you fill up more and more. Now, I'm still trying to convince you, and I need to just stop, because the truth is, I can't tell you this. You have to find out. And so for the next 4 weeks of this series, and for the 4 months after that, for this next season, together, let's just find out. You want to? Is there anybody that actually wants more life? Anybody looking for more life, or is it just me? Jesus says, I'll show you the way. The question is, when he invites you to do that, will you say yes? Would you be crazy enough or bold enough to ask God, what's my next step in sharing the good of my life with others? And then if he was crazy enough to answer you, would you actually say yes? And so here's how we're going to get started. You ready? The first step in all of this is very, very simple. Choose to follow Jesus. Some of you are like, I did that 25 years ago. Yeah, I know. But you need to choose again. Because every single time there's a next step for every single one of us. Craig or Shell, if you're not dead, you're not done. There is more of us that can look more and more like Jesus. He always has more in store. It's my favorite thing. The life he'll give you never runs out. And so would you choose to have a conversation with Jesus and invite him to show you the way to share more good so that you and others have more life? We're going to give you some time here in just a few minutes to actually reflect on that before I come back and wrap this thing up. But have a conversation with Jesus. Now, some of you are like, you've never followed Jesus before. And maybe it is time. Maybe baptism is your next step. Maybe it is like you've seen enough of Jesus that you actually just need to say yes and jump in to his plan for you to live into the best kind of life, that nothing can separate you from God, and you want to dive in head first and just get rolling. Choose to follow Jesus, and the right time for that is always right now. For some of you, you're not sure about this whole Jesus thing. And so maybe what you could do is just choose to follow Jesus in this one simple way. To just let him show you how to share some good of your life and see how it goes. Just see if he was right when he said it's better to give than receive. And if it is, maybe that gives you enough trust to take just another step with Jesus. But no matter what, no one can tell you to choose Jesus. I can't tell it for you. I can't decide that for everyone. You have to decide it. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a song, and you get to have just a few minutes to have a conversation with God, to think about whether you really want to say yes, to think about whether you really want more life and whether you really believe Jesus will lead you there. And so this song is a great way to express that. If you're not sure how to pray, the words of this song will help you a ton. You can sing them, you can say them, you can read them, you can do whatever. You can sit, you can stand, doesn't really matter, whatever works for you. If being alone with God is your thing, just lean forward, close your eyes, and have some quiet time with God as this song plays. But for the next few minutes, you and God decide. Do you want to trust him for more life than ever before? And would you be willing to follow Jesus in that direction? I'll be back in a few minutes to wrap it up.
Holy, there is no one like you.
You can have a seat for just a second. Listen, Jesus uses this one more picture in Matthew chapter 7 where he talks about wise and foolish builders. He uses this picture of a house built on a rock sustains in a storm, but a house built on sand does not. And he says that the difference between those two people who build their house on a sand are people who hear what he has to say but do not put it into practice. Where the wise builder built on rock. And what that is those who hear what Jesus has to say and puts it into practice. And so for this season of our church, we're going to put into practice what Jesus is saying. We're going to take him at his word that we are better off giving than getting. And so we're going to challenge ourselves and one another for this whole next season. We're going to listen to God for every single one of us on what our next step might be in giving more than we've ever given before, sharing with others more than we've ever taken before. All the good of our life, our connections, our friendship, our resources, and our strength, taking those and offering those in fresh and new ways to everyone around us the best that we can, and trusting him to taking him at his word that he'll give us and others more life than he's ever given before. And so I hope that as you start this conversation with God, that he's speaking clearly to you, that you have a desire for more life. Is there anyone who wants more life? Anybody? I do. I don't think we've seen the best yet. I think Jesus has more in store, but the way he's pointing us forward is by taking the good he's given us and sharing it with others. And so I want to encourage you, jump in for the next 4 weeks. We're going to talk about Jesus next week. We're going to talk about his followers the week after. And then the last week, we're going to jump in and try to say yes together for the next 4 weekends. Starting next weekend for less than $2, I think we're going to have these little books, which are not a bunch of information. What it is a conversation for you to start having with God, to look back at what the past season of your life has looked like, how sharing good has brought life, and look forward to the next season and dream big about what sharing more of the good of your life could look like. And then to come together with a few great people, maybe your life group, your family, a few friends, and pray and talk together about what a best next step for you would be with God, because it'll be different for every single one of us. And then to make a commitment together, you and God and the people you follow God with, to do what Jesus said and watch life in you and life in others around you fill up more and more and more. And so I hope you'll jump in. Grab this. Start praying and thinking about a few people to surround yourself with that you would take this journey with. And we're going to watch as God fills you and me up with life as we follow Jesus to more life than ever before. Would you stand and pray with me? And so, God, I'm just grateful that you invite us to life. Thank you for Jesus, who is the life. And God, I pray that we would know you and walk with you more and more and more. God, give us the boldness to do what you say. Help us be crazy enough to trust you. That if we share the good of our lives, you'll only bring more good into our life. And that life in us will well up as we share it, and life in others will well up as well. And so, God, help us be doers of what you say, not just hearers. God, help us trust you more and more. Help us really follow you. And God, bring life to every single one of us, into life and life to everyone around us, God, to our city, to our workplaces, to our friends, to our neighbors, certainly to our families, God. We love you and we're counting on you. We will follow you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Have an awesome weekend. Go Eagles. See you next week.